I'ma keep winning, winning. I'ma keep winning, winning. Ooh. I'ma keep winning, winning. You can try to save yourself, but you only go.
What's going on, guys? JK back on our video, and today in this video I'm going to be going over my biggest winners and losers from the NFL free agency that just happened. I'm going to be giving you three of my biggest losers and three of my biggest winners that took place after everything has kind of settled down in free agency. But before we get into it, please make sure to like the video, comment down below anything you agree or disagree with I talk about in here, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for future NFL content I'm going to be putting out, whether it's pro days, NFL draft stuff, and all the changes with different mock drafts I'm going to be putting out. Make sure to subscribe to be able to keep up with all that. And let's make sure and go ahead and get into this video with all my biggest losers and winners from free agency. Starting out with my first one, I'm going to be going over the three losers that I have. And first off, I have the Raiders. And some of the key signings that they pretty much brought in was Jeremy Chin, Alex Kappa, Raheem Mostert, and Eric Stokes. And mostly with the Raiders, before we even went into free agency, they were considered one of the least talented teams in the NFL. I think it's mostly about with them having all their cap space, they didn't necessarily have to spend all that money because you don't want to be able to go out and overpay. Like I think the Patriots did a lot. I think they went out and overpaid a lot of guys. The Raiders didn't really do that, but they also didn't really sign anybody of significance or even try to be able to help their team out. With them already having one of the worst rosters in the NFL, you would think that they'd want to go out and try to fill different places, and it's kind of different because Pete Carroll came in. He's a 70-year-old coach that's only going to be coaching for a couple more years. You would think that they'd want to contend right now instead of going through a whole couple year rebuild. And in the draft, they brought in Geno Smith, so that kind of took them out of the quarterback discussion, and they kind of lined themselves up to be able to go in and take Ashton Jeanty, is what a lot of people are thinking. And the main argument for me with this would be if you're taking Ashton Jeanty in there in the draft, how much is he really going to help this Raiders team? So I could easily see Pete Carroll doing what he did in Seattle. He fell in love with a couple different type of defensive guys. I could easily see somebody like a Jalen Walker being a Pete Carroll type guy that they could end up taking, maybe a Micah Williams. They do have Tyree Wilson still. They do have Max Crosby, but they just need help, honestly, and depth at any position on that defense and just in general. So if they could do end up drafting Ashton Jeanty, how much is that really going to help their team? They're not very talented on all levels, so it's not really going to make a huge jump for them and win them a lot of games by drafting Jeanty. I know Jeanty is one of the most talented running backs we've seen in years, but just putting him on the Raiders team compared to another team like the Bears, how much of a difference is that really going to make for this Raiders team? And with them bringing in Geno Smith to take them kind of out of the quarterback discussion, I think if maybe like a Shador falls to him at six, then maybe they still take him. But you bringing in a 34-year-old Geno Smith, a 7-year-old head coach in Pete Carroll, and that really makes you think that you're going to want to come out and compete right now and be able to contend and try to be able to make a run to be competitive in the NFL instead of going through this whole rebuild thing. And they came in, they signed Jeremy Chin. Jeremy Chin's a decent safety, but they ended up letting Trayvon Merrick go, who ended up struggling and really had a breakout year this past year, though. And you would think that they'd want to bring back their own guys, and they didn't really do that. They kind of just let their own guys walk and brought in cheaper replacements that weren't as good as their own guys. They bring in Alex Kappa as well. Alex Kappa is one of the worst offensive linemen in the NFL last year. He's rated as one of the worst guards. He was rated 32nd in run blocking and pass blocking. So bringing him in, maybe you can get a little bit of a revival from him with the Pete Carroll system and the run game. But with him on the Bengals, he was one of the worst guards. So not necessarily him wanting to bring him in. Raheem Mostert did shine a lot in Miami. He did quite a bit of stuff before he was able to get injured and had to come back. He does deal with his injuries quite a bit. So he could get a lot of reps in there running back, but he's not necessarily a true starting running back as we've seen in Miami once Devon Achane ended up coming in and taking over. And Eric Stokes, he definitely started out very well with the Packers at the beginning of his year, and he kind of started to decline and struggle. You would think that they would want to bring in instead of they would want to bring back Trayvon Morick, and they would want to bring back Nate Hobbs instead of just letting them walk and go to different teams and signing lesser and not as good as replacements for him. So it's kind of, a difficult situation and kind of a weird situation of the way that they're trying to attack this. And that's why I think that they're one of the bigger losers in this free agency. On to another one of the biggest losers from free agency was the Bengals, and I think it's kind of more the same way from as the Raiders was. The Bengals just didn't do much. They didn't really sign anybody. A lot of people thought that they might be more aggressive, especially some Bengals fans. They thought that they might be aggressive in certain people. There was people out there like Mekhi Becton they could have possibly brought in and signed to that offensive line instead of the Chargers. There were a couple other pieces that they were kind of looking at that they could have potentially brought in, but their owner was just too cheap and they didn't really want to bring anybody in and be able to pay them a lot of big bucks. They brought back Samaje Perine from the Chiefs and was able to sign him on cheap, and then they pretty much just focused on re-signing their own guys. They signed BJ Hill, they brought back Mike Gesicki, which is a deal that I actually kind of like with Mike Gesicki. And then they just made Jamar Chase actually yesterday one of the most expensive NFL players in NFL history that was not a quarterback. So they're really focused on signing their own guys. But if you look at the rest of the roster, I get that you're wanting to take care of your own guys and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. But as a ownership and a team, you should have had those deals done long before this. There's no reason that you should have been able to tag T. Higgins a second time and wait for them to pretty much not have a deal done and tag him 2 years in a row. They should have already had a deal done for T. Higgins and they knew that they were going to keep him. And then Jamar Chase, they should have already had a deal because they're pretty much just screwing themselves the longer that they wait because they instead of getting a deal done for cheaper, you waited and then all these receivers and edge rushers are starting to get paid like Max Crosby and DK Metcalf, and that just raises the price on your own guys like with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. They could have got them for a lot cheaper than what they could have already had. But instead, they waited too long. Now they have to pay those guys even more. And then on top of that, you have the whole Trey Henderson situation going on where you're not going to be able to pay him. He's kind of getting older. He's 30, 31 years old. And by the time you would sign him to a 2 to 3 year deal, he's the best edge rusher in the league right now with the best stats. And the more you wait, the Max Crosby deal just gets done, so his price just goes up more and more instead of being able just to go ahead and get his deal done and get it on a cheaper contract and instead of just waiting, you end up just pretty much wasting and just not getting the stuff done. So then you have to spend even more money against the cap while your team is not a very good sound team overall. So then you don't really have anybody else to be able to be a supporting cast for any of those guys that you have to pay. On top of that, you haven't really been drafting very well. You have the 17th overall pick, so you're probably looking for another defensive player and a loaded edge class. And they really need to be able to come out and excel in the draft, which they haven't been able to do. So they're not going to be able to replace a lot of these guys that they're going to end up losing, like Trey Henderson, because they haven't very drafted very well. And they're not really paying the money out. And if they were a little bit more aggressive and was in on the signings and free agency with a couple different pieces, then maybe they could be more competitive. On to my last loser of this video. On to my last loser of this video. I'm going with the San Francisco 49ers. In my opinion, I definitely thought the 49ers were going to be more aggressive. I thought that they were going to be kind of more all in to be able to win this year. They just brought in Robert Saleh as the defensive coordinator, so they're looking to be a lot better defensively. I know you still have the Brock Purdy contract coming up, but they pretty much just bailed out their entire team to try to try to be able to buy that Brock Purdy contract, and I'm not really a big fan of that. You let a lot of people go. They ended up trading Debo, who is on the decline, so that's not a big deal. You end up looking and rumors of trading Brandon Ayuk, so they're letting go of a lot of the receivers. They end up getting Kyle Juszczyk on a smaller deal. It looked like that they were just going to let him go, but they ended up bringing him back on a cheaper deal, so that's a little bit better. They end up signing a guard or two, but in all, they're pretty much just depleted their team, and they're not going to be as good. They let a lot of guys walk, like Tre'Davious Ward, Drake Greenlaw, to Talisa Fulanga at safety, and all those defensive guys that they ended up letting go is going to be a big hit for them, and they're just not going to be as good as they were the last 2 years after being killed by injuries the last year. They went and they ended up signing Trent Williams last year, and he dealt with a whole lot of injuries, and he's old. He's almost 40 years old. So I guess we'll see how he ends up doing. this next year and how he comes back from injury. They brought in a couple key signings like Jason Pinnock, who played for Robert Saleh in New York, and he ended up playing for the Giants and playing very well. But they didn't really bring in a lot of other pieces to be able to replace a lot of those guys, and they just overall did not get as good just because they had to prepare for that Brock Purdy contract that's going to be coming up. And I think that it's going to be a big overpay. I don't think Brock Purdy is that big game difference maker that you're going to have, that you're going to be able to pay him at quarterback a whole lot of money. And I think that's going to be a mistake since you had a lot of these other pieces, especially the defensive pieces they had to let go. And it's going to show in that Robert Saleh offense where they end up not having as good as a defense as they would probably originally think with Robert Saleh coming in. Now on the three winners of this video in free agency, I'm going to start out with the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears came into the free agency and they had two main goals. It was improving the trenches and protect Caleb Williams, and they were able to do just that. This doesn't include their trades. They ended up trading for Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson to upgrade both their guard positions, but then they came out and they pretty much completed the five pieces of the offensive line by going out and signing Drew Dahlman from the Atlanta Falcons that was able to pretty much show off that brand new offensive line that's going to be able to protect Caleb after just coming off one of the most sacked quarterback seasons in NFL history as a rookie. So hopefully he's going to be able to stay upright. Hopefully they're going to be able to run the ball more with the Ben Johnson offense. They were able to go out and get their head coach. Also in free agency, the Atlanta Falcons kind of had a shock cutting, and they ended up cutting Grady Jarrett. The Bears ended up coming out and they ended up helping their defense line, getting both the edge piece from the Colts, Deo, and be able to sign Grady Jarrett on the interior to be able to help out that interior, that defensive line. And then they also, towards the end, they ended up going out and getting a cheap option for the slot position and getting Zeturius from the Commanders. I always mess up his name, but he ends up having his days on the Commanders. He had a game where it was three touchdowns against the Eagles, and he ended up going off in certain. And he's a good, reliable slot piece that's going to be able to step in for the Chicago Bears. And they pretty much set themselves up to either take a running back or a tight end, I think is where the pieces that they're going to go. They ended up bringing in very good defensive line pieces. They ended up bringing very good offensive line pieces. I think right now at the 10th pick, they're going to be taking the best available of whoever's there between Ashton Jeanty and Tyler Warren. And I think they did a very good job of focusing on Caleb Williams' development. They brought him in a head coach. They ended up bringing in a great offensive line through this free agency. They brought him in a new slot weapon, and they ended up upgrading the defense line as well to bring pieces to Montez Sweat and be able to get complementary pieces that's going to be able to come in and make an impact in the run game and the run defense and be able to get after the quarterback on defense. So I think the Chicago Bears did a great job of being able to use their money and their trade assets to bring in some young, I mean, it's a little bit older mixed with a couple of young pieces that are going to cost them a little bit more money, but it's definitely great to be able to focus on Caleb Williams' production and his development. Then coming in with the second winners, I have the Minnesota Vikings. As we seen there towards the end of the year, their biggest issue was the interior offensive line. I know that they lost Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold is going to be going to the Seattle Seahawks. But two of their biggest issues was offense and defense line, and they came out and they attacked that fully to be able to prepare for whoever's going to be the quarterback. Right now, the sources was that Aaron Rodgers are waiting on the Vikings to be able to commit to him, and Aaron Rodgers really wants to go to Minnesota, but the Vikings are still kind of weighing their options where they want to just stick with JJ McCarthy coming in to be the starting quarterback coming off an injury. This would be his overall first season in the NFL since he was injured all last year on his rookie year. But whether they bring in Rodgers or JJ McCarthy, they have definitely set up their quarterback in great ways from the ways that they struggled last year with Sam Darnold. First off, like I said, their biggest issues was offense and defensive line. Offensive line, they came in and they addressed that. They ended up signing Ryan Kelly, this Colts from the center from the Colts, who has been very good for the last couple of years for the Colts. He is a little bit aging, but he definitely is an upgrade off what they had with Garrett Bradbury. Bradbury was kind of like in a lower end center. He got the job done, but he wasn't anything special. And Ryan Kelly's definitely an upgrade at that spot. And then they were also able to go and poke Will Fries from the Colts to be able to go and sign him and give him pretty much a big deal to go in and play guard to be able to upgrade that interior. A lot of people had them mocked a interior offensive lineman like Gray Zabel in the draft, somebody like that. But I think that they set themselves up to kind of go with other areas of holes that they would need after free agency and attacking the interior offensive line. They could easily go with the defensive back or defensive player in the draft. Along with their defensive line being kind of an issue, they went out and Jonathan Allen was cut from the Commanders because they couldn't find a trade partner for him, and he kind of wanted out from the Commanders. They would come in and bring in Jonathan Allen to be in the interior of that defensive line to help out with their running game. The running game was kind of a weak point in the Brian Flores defense. They were able to get to the quarterback a lot with a lot of their different exotic blitzes that they would show. And on top of Jonathan Allen in that interior, they were also able to go out and sign Javon Hargrave, which is going to be a great piece and great complementary piece to Jonathan Allen, which was another guy that the 49ers had to let go because they could not pay him because they were going to be able to pay Brock Purdy. So the Vikings were able to take advantage of the Colts letting a lot of guys walk and a lot of cuts from team players that either wanted out or that the team wasn't going to be able to play, and they were able to come in and address their trenches with the offensive line and their defensive line. The last winner free agency that I'm going to be going over is the Buccaneers. And the reason that the Buccaneers are winners is because, in my opinion, I thought Chris Godwin was going to be gone. I thought New England, the Patriots, were going to go out and try to get Drake May more weapons. They didn't really attack the weapons part in free agency. And Chris Godwin didn't actually get the bag. He ended up going back to the Buccaneers. And this actually benefits the Buccaneers because if they were not able to sign Chris Godwin, they would have had a bigger hit in their dead cap of their cap space instead of just re-signing him, and they were able to go out and get a deal done and keep their main three cores with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Jalen McMillan in place for Baker Mayfield. Now, I know Liam Cohen ended up leaving. He's going to be the head coach of the Jaguars, but I think that offense is still going to be a great place for whoever they bring in as OC and a great kind of, complementary piece to each other to be able to go out and execute like they did last year. They were finally able to pretty much take care of Chris Godwin and get him a long-term deal done. And then the other pieces, they were able to bring out 1-year prove-it deals for guys that kind of struggled last year, but they were able to pretty much be high reward, low risk type moves, such as Hassan Reddick being the main one. Hassan Reddick obviously was one of the best edge rushers in Philly, and once he ended up going to the Jets, he kind of sat out a couple games and kind of held out for a new contract, but once he was able to go to the Jets and actually started to play, he was a little bit disappointing and didn't show the skill set that he had in Philly and kind of showed a step that he had lost, which the Buccaneers see that. The Buccaneers needed edge rush. They're definitely missing the edge rush position. They still have Vita Vea, but they definitely do need to get an edge rusher on that defense line. And they're able to do that with Hassan Reddick to give him like a 1 year, I believe it was $12 million deal. And if he ends up coming out and playing very well, then they could re-sign him to another deal next year. But if he ends up not playing very good and being the same way that he was on the Jets, they could easily just let him walk, and it's not really going to cause them any issues. So it's a big high reward, low risk type signing that they were able to come in and be able to add to the roster to be able to be a better team next year and hopefully be an improvement and maybe even going out and win a playoff game with their offense that they were able to bring back. So these are the 6 teams, I think, 3 winners and 3 losers of free agency. So please make sure to like the video, comment down below anything you agreed or disagree with, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for future NFL content I'm going to be putting out. And thanks for watching.
Yeah, feel like John Moran, need a triple-double, told him check the stats, yeah, I got a couple, I don't drop the ball, now I never fumble, I'm the MVP, now I feel like Russell, feel like John Moran, need a triple-double, told him check the stats, yeah, I got a couple.